This episode, this is where I say I've had enough. Magic.
We bring the magic.
We bring the magic. Welcome back. You just gonna talk over me? You gonna talk over?
I was just gonna say more about how people always say we bring the magic.
Yeah, that's exactly what people say every single time they listen to us. Like, man, those guys bring the magic. Speaking of those guys, welcome to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. My name is David. My friend is Aaron. You've got
AKA Magic Johnson.
AKA Magic Johnson. All right. You've got some new artwork behind you. Does this mean like every time we roll through a different series, you're going to update your wall?
Well, I guess the pressure's on now.
Yeah, it is. You started something, man. Now, like, it's very fitting for what we're doing right now. See, I've decorated my wall to just like hopefully not have to touch it again. You know what the kind of sad thing is about doing like a backdrop like this is that I look at it in the camera and I realize, man, there's like good things that I put on this wall intentionally and you can't even see them.
Yeah, I should have done it to fit specifically around our heads. And
yeah.
And now when I look, it's like, oh, it's not level with the top of the screen, but
Yeah.
I wasn't that prepared, so whatever.
Yeah. Well, because like there's some like down here, I was like, I gotta move it maybe. But it's like a sick show poster for Jimmy Eat World and At the Drive-In and Hot Rod Circuit. And then it looks real good with this one. Anyway, we're getting off topic a little bit about decorating, but it's just something that every now and then I'm like, oh yeah, I want to put that up too. Like I was trying earlier today, and this is the problem with this setup. I was trying to find a spot for this. If I can open it. That's the wrong way. There we go.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So, you can put it on the wall to kind of your right there.
This wall?
Yeah.
Or on the door over here?
No,
not
somewhere there.
I don't know. The problem is, this wall I spent time decorating. I'm like, man, should I just swap that now? So it's just this Jimmy Eat World poster? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, well, you're the one that inspired this. The last time we did it, was like, because there was the posters I had on before were glossy, so it was like glaring, and it was like, maybe I should just do something black and white. And I was like, hey, we're doing labels. Why not just put all the labels in the background?
All the labels. So. Now the problem is, though, is like I see this, and I'm looking at some of your labels on there, and I'm like, oh, are we gonna cover that label? I can see Hellcat, Death Wish, No Sleep. These are just Nitro. Some of the labels, Betty Rocket. Some of the labels some of them we've discussed, and some like that we're gonna do, and then some that we haven't. Rise Records, Pure Noise, man.
It was mostly to fill the space and trying to have a good representation of whether it's bands or labels we talk about, or just that they're a part of this, or have influenced in one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, before we get into talking about another label here, make sure you go follow us on our social media at Growing Punk Pod. You'll find us on Twitter and Instagram. You'll find our personal Twitters and Instagrams linked there as well. And we're on Facebook. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube. Like, we're talking about all this stuff that is a visual sort of thing. So if you're listening to the podcast and you want to see what we're talking about, specifically the Jimmy Eat World poster maybe that I held up, you could go check us out on YouTube. And growingpunkpod.com is our website. We've got merch there. If you want to grab yourself a t-shirt, a poorly designed t-shirt, that's a good way to sell it. If you want to grab yourself a poorly designed, overpriced t-shirt, go check it out.
Like a lot of the bands try to sell when they come to town.
Yeah. Growingpunkpod.com. You'll find the podcast there as well. And sometimes we write reviews and just what we're listening to, stuff like that we don't talk about on the show. And on occasion, when I'm not super lazy, I also, and when I say on occasion, I mean at the point of recording this, I've done this once. I transcribed an entire interview that you did. I was bored.
Yeah, that's a lot of work, man.
Oh man, I didn't realize how much work it was. I didn't even transcribe the entire interview. That's the Russ Rankin episode that I'm talking about that just came out this past week. You can read the transcription of him talking about basically the start from the beginning of the interview. So start talking about getting signed to Fat Records and his 5 favorite Fat Records releases. But then I stopped at that point. I was like, okay, that's the point. So
can you not just play the interview and then press the little microphone for Siri or whatever just to record the whole thing?
It's funny because like I Googled different ways that you can like easy ways to transcribe or whatever for free. And honestly, one of the ways that came up was like play your episode like on headphones, put it on a microphone that's hooked up to your computer, and then just go into Google Drive or whatever, Google Docs, and start a new document and select dictate. And the problem is that it's not very good at it, for one, because we talk too fast. Like when we're just conversing, right? We talk faster than if you're dictating. And then two, there's no punctuation. It's just then like it'll just like continue as one big blog or blob that I've got to go through and like format and whatever.
You just have to yell period. So as you're listening to that, period, exclamation.
Yeah. Or when we're doing these interviews or whatever, that we'll just have to do that in the interview, you know? So at this point we'd be like, all right, moving on, period. full stop.
That will get super annoying for everyone.
Yeah, for all the listeners. And then I got to go through and I'll just edit it out in the actual audio. So I'm adding work somewhere, right? So but we'll see if those continue or not. It was fun, like, you know, to go through and actually like listen and a few times be like, what exactly did he say there? And like jump back and listen to you guys in slow motion. And, you know, like you guys sound so great. Very hammered when you're talking at slow speeds.
Yeah, you should post some clips of that next time.
I should. Yeah, just like a slowed down episode where you sound like this a little bit. So, yeah, no. Let's get into things. We're going to talk about Vagrant Records for this week and next week. We've got a guest lined up. I'll tell you who the guest is now. He's been on the show a few times. This marks technically his fourth appearance on the show. Roger Camaro of No Motive is our guest next week, and yeah, we've talked in depth with Roger about all the No Motive records. Actually, like we're at a point where we could literally just start a No Motive podcast. And then he was featured. He did a bit for our quarantine scene episodes that we did. Shared some records that he's into. So yeah, that's coming up next week. This week he's going to share his 5 favorites. Next week, this week we're going to each share our 5 favorites. But before we get to that, why don't do you remember the first time that you kind of heard about Vagrant Records? Maybe what that album was?
Yeah, it was a compilation, as with many labels that we've mentioned. I think it was probably one of another Year on the Street ones, because I can picture the cover of it, seeing it. What
was the cover? Do you remember?
Just like a kind of the guy with a hat on or something, or
was he holding a sign? Was the cover blue?
Yeah, it could have been.
Okay, so because my guess is what you're actually talking about is was the compilation 5 Years on the Streets. Did it have like MXPX?
Is that Vagrant or no?
Yeah. Did it have MXPX and Blink 182 and stuff?
I can't remember that specifically.
Well, get it together, man. Because that was I say that because that was, I think, like that was what introduced me to Vagrant. That's what I was trying to figure out, if it was that compilation or if it was No Motive and The Sadness Prevails, because it was around the same time, and I've talked about that compilation a few times. Because the Another Year on the Streets ones, they started coming out in the 2000s, early 2000s, maybe the year 2000 actually, whereas 5 Years on the Streets was a few years before that, and it had like No Motive was on there. Blink 182 had a cover song. MXPX had a cover song. Face to Face was on there. Maybe I'll look it up and see if I can screen share it with you, because I'm just curious if it's the same one.
This is back when comps were so big. So I mean, there was a lot of them, and you'd go to a store, and under the last letters, would have all the compilations because it wasn't under one letter, so you'd kind of flip through and see which one stood out. And
let's see if I can share screen. I
was trying to think of that today, and I couldn't remember exactly which one it was, but that looks familiar.
That's it. Yeah.
So that was Vagrant, and they just had random bands on it.
Yeah. So I don't know the whole story behind. I'm curious because it's come up a few times. I wonder if I can find a bit of background on this. No, it just tells me about the streets, which is not what I'm looking for. Yeah. Well, interesting. Okay, so oh, this is fantastic. I got to screen share something with you again. because this is funny. This is a reason to watch us on YouTube. All right, hold on here. Okay, so you can see what I've searched up, right?
Yeah.
5 years on the streets wiki. That's what I'm looking for. I just wanted to see if there's any information on it. So if I scroll down, so we get the streets discography, which doesn't surprise me. If I continue scrolling down, what just came up?
Penile enlargement.
Yeah, why not, right? Because
that is a compilation I don't want to see. Or hear.
So there we go. You search for 5 years on the streets wiki and you get something about penile enlargement. I'm not even sure what it is, but I'm sure what penile enlargement is, but why that came up or what that link goes to. But hey, here we are. So you're saying it was the 5 years on the streets compilation that kind of introduced you to them. So did you own it, or did a friend have it, or what was the story there?
Oh man, I feel like it was so like some of the comps that we've talked about I can specifically remember, like the Fat Records one because my brother had it. Yeah. But lots of these were either like floating around or you'd see it in a store or maybe a friend had it. I don't have it now, which doesn't mean I didn't have it then, but I can't remember that specifically.
Yeah. I know I had it, and I believe I bought it because if I bring that cover art back up, it says right on the front featuring Face to Face, Blink-182, MXPX. I was like, yeah, okay, I'm in. You've got me.
Which is funny because, well, maybe at that, like, was Face to Face even on there at the time, or they were just...
Yeah, so this is the thing I've been trying to kind of pinpoint and figure out with Vagrant Records. Because again, I'm not researching, but looking things up as we go. Because if you go to like the Vagrant Records release, like their discogs, and you go down, they started by releasing a bunch of, it looks like 7 inches, and going through them. Face to Face had a 10-inch, and then that's not true. Hold on. Well, the 10-inch is true. I'm just looking because the Face to Face live album was on Vagrant, and it looks like, I don't know what the connection was with Face to Face, but they were definitely around early, and then obviously they were on Fat Wreck early on, and then like a major, and then eventually they did come to Vagrant. But so there is some stuff that they had early on that was on Vagrant Records, but. Yeah, that specifically, the 5 years on the streets. When did that come out?
And I mean, it was common for labels to put out comps back then that did have other bands.
Right.
So whether it was just to bring, more attention to it or just...
Yeah, because 5 years on the streets came out in 1998, which is also when the Face to Face live record came out.
Oh, yeah.
That 10-inch that I was talking about, where is it here? Face to Face... Econo Live 10-inch EP was 1996. But I'm not... It's funny because I think a lot of times the kind of the first record that's referred to as coming out on Vagrant, I think was like the Boxer record.
Oh, yeah.
As far as like a studio full length. Again, this is all stuff that I feel like I could have researched more. Like I'm pretty sure if I go into Vagrant's Wikipedia though, it lists that as being their first release. Yeah. So, but when you go on their Discogs, there's a bunch of stuff. But I also think they reissued some stuff, and then so that comes up. The first band signed by Vagrant Records was Boxer, and their album The Hurt Process, released on May 5th, 1998. The pop-punk album notably featured drummer Chris Penny, who would go on to play with Dillinger Escape Plan and Coheed and Cambria. So that just says they were the first band signed by Vagrant was Boxer, and then it says The Hurt Process released on May 5th. So I don't even know. It's so confusing to me because Discogs has so much going on there. But
yeah,
that I think for a lot of people that 5 years on the streets was definitely kind of the start, the introduction for a lot of people. And I know they had, I think, a compilation out before that as well called Before You Were Punk, which I believe was a cover.
Yeah, I remember that one too. Yeah.
Yeah. Before You Were Punk compilation.
I think I actually have that one.
Yeah, maybe. It's a good lineup. Good Riddance, I Melt With You, No Use for a Name, Turning Japanese, Face to Face, In Between Days, Guttermouth, Automatic 7. So yeah, like Blink-182, Dancing With Myself, that's on 5 Years on the Streets. It's also on this one here. Yeah, so anyways, a bunch of California punk bands putting out some covers on that one. So that's pretty rad. So, but yeah, there we are. That's you don't know exactly when you discovered Vagrant, but you can remember the CD, so that's cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially with a picture like that on the front, like it just kind of stuck in my mind.
Yeah. So, and I think the 5 Years on the Streets thing was referring to, because like I said, on their Discogs page, as far as I can understand, they kind of released a bunch of like 7 inches and singles and whatever was kind of like what they started with, as it were. But so that was the sort of the 5 years. I could be entirely wrong about all of this. That's just what I've kind of gathered. So anyway, let's get into our top 5 releases from Vagrant Records. Now, before we dive into this, same rules apply, only one record per band. And on top of that, some of these picks, I think we altered a little bit just to kind of complement each other's lists. For me, I should say before we really dive in, for me, Vagrant Records was kind of the first label after discovering Tooth and Nail. I mean, I discovered Tooth and Nail a few years before that, but it was kind of the first label for me where I would see the Vagrant logo on it and I'd be like, man, I got to buy this. And a lot of that was going on in the early 2000s, and we'll dive into some of those records because that's when they really blew up. But yeah, so for me, that's where a lot of it comes from is, like just going like, oh, it's another Vagrant record, I should get this. And, and buying their compilations. You mentioned Another Year on the Streets. They had a couple versions of those. So, yeah, we tried to complement each other's lists a little bit to cover kind of a few more albums than maybe just doubling up on all of them. But what's your number 5?
Yeah, well, I'll just say that Vagrant was, a lot of the releases on the label where, and there's a few labels like this or bands, and this will come up here and there that, it was more one that, friends listened to. So it wasn't, none of the picks on mine are ones that I know super well or, kind of go back to a lot. But these 5 are ones that stand out for one reason or another. And lots of, so today I was working from home today and I had the house to myself. And so I played through a bunch of these albums from both of our lists. And it was fun to kind of rediscover some or even newly discover some. So the first one I'll go with is From Autumn to Ashes, The Fiction We Live. And this is one of the few that I can recall, or as I was going through the list of the heavier bands on Vagrant. And this is one, there was a few songs that when this came out that I had on like a burn CD that I listened to every day on my lunch break at work. And I saw them live one year with Killswitch Engage, I think, and they were really cool live. So I don't know the album super well, but I think because it is one of the heavier ones, I'm kind of drawn to it. So I was listening through it today, and it was kind of like, okay, like there's some really cool parts on this, but I don't know if it's aged super well. The clean vocals are kind of like whiny and a little too 2004, Yeah. But still, it's still, when I was listening to it, it still took me back. It still reminded me of like, kind of starting to discover some heavier bands. And so, yeah, I don't really remember like the first time hearing this band, but because they were a heavier band and seeing them live. And yeah, as I listened to it today, I did enjoy it. Like I listened through the whole thing, and at the end it was like, okay, like I don't want to go back and listen to it again right away, but it's still an album I can enjoy for what it is.
Yeah, this is one I owned this record. I feel like in a way it's a little bit before its time, maybe. Because I feel like it was, I shouldn't say it's before its time. It's because it's like right at the very, very beginning, I feel, of like when kind of like metalcore sort of stuff was starting to really take off. And they're also a band that I could, like one of the first bands I can remember that their drummer, like that I discovered anyways, that their drummer was also a vocalist.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's crazy. But he wore like the Britney Spears like headset sort of thing,
yeah.
like Garth Brooks like microphone, which is kind of silly to see. But
that's probably the only option there was back then.
Well, no, I mean, because like Under Oath, obviously Aaron Gillespie was doing his thing. He just had the mic in his face.
Right.
Like, it was probably obviously the most freeing for him as a vocalist to not have to worry about, and a drummer to not have to worry about being in one specific spot. But it was just always kind of silly to see. But I mean, this record, I like. When I was listening to it today as well, and because it was one that I kind of jotted down as, you know, like records I remember really liking from Vagrant, and listening to it today, I was like, I can see what you're saying about the, you know, it hasn't necessarily aged super well. It does sound very much in its time. But I was thinking about the vocals, the singing, the clean vocals, and I was like, I kind of like them because they are a little bit different, I think, than what would eventually come for that whole sound, right? Like,
it's not as polished and kind of poppy sounding. It's a little... Yeah, maybe whiny is not the right word. I don't know.
No, I think whiny is the right word because he is definitely
emotionally whiny. I don't know.
He's definitely. I want to say he's definitely leaning more into, like you say, emotional, more into kind of like a traditional emo post-hardcore vocal delivery sort of thing, where he will. Yeah. He's definitely not afraid to let it break and kind of like really, I guess, let that emotion lead the song. Some of the songs like. They're a band that I didn't follow up with. Like, I mean, I listened to the record that came after this, but I was like, all right, cool. Like, I did my thing. But no, I did enjoy this record. It's very much an early 2000s record in everything about it, including like the artwork and stuff. But no, it's one that on occasion, on very rare occasion, I come back to and go, oh yeah, like these guys. They fit in well with some other bands that I was listening to at that time, like Hope's Fall and Poison the Well for sure. Stuff. So, but yeah, my number 5 was one that I debated not including on this list because they actually made my previous list for Fat Records, because this band's been around and we were just talking about them. But Face to Face and How to Ruin Everything. This record for me was, if I recall correctly, it was the first like record where I was a Face to Face fan when it was coming out. Like, so I was anticipating it. And we've talked about that with different bands where you kind of discover them when they've got a few records out and you kind of fall in love with those earlier albums. And then, you know, there's that one record or whatever where you're like, okay, I'm pumped for this new one that's coming out. And this was Face to Face for me, if I recall correctly, because like before that, I had Big Choice and the live album were the only two Face to Face records I had before that. And so when this one came out, I remember immediately loving it. And also at the same time, I was like a little bit confused because I didn't know what the relationship was between Face to Face and Vagrant Records. And I think actually at this point, they maybe had already had an album out. Obviously there's a live album, but a studio album out on Vagrant Records, maybe two. Like, I'd have to go back and look a little closer, but this one always stuck with me because this was also the tour that I saw them live for the first time on. And it was a show that I will probably never forget because it kind of ended up being two different shows that were booked in Calgary for the same day. One was the Face to Face show and the other was Guttermouth with like Riddling Kids and someone else. Yeah. And so Face to Face was touring with Moneen and someone. I think both tours had 3 bands total, so it ended up being like this 6-band show. And Face to Face and Guttermouth were like co-headliners. And I can just remember Guttermouth was playing, and I was out in like the merch area talking with Kenny from Moneen because I was like, I'm here for this tour, like Moneen and Face to Face, not so much, you know, this tour that's Guttermouth and Riddling Kids or whatever. But so like seeing them live on that tour, and I was just blown away by them, and they were so good. And I think this record is very like raw in its sound, which I really appreciate. And I think if I recall correctly, the history of Face to Face, they were a trio on this record versus being a 4-piece, basically the rest of the time. So it's very straightforward. I mean, Face to Face is always very straightforward, but it is an absolute, like I love this record. It's still one I listen to it today as well, where I'm just like, oh, it gets me every time, every single time.
Yeah, I should have gone back and listened to this one today. I didn't get to this. I have it on CD. I haven't listened to it in years. There was a few in there. There was this one. There was Reactionary. There might have been another one too where I just kind of lost interest in it. I don't know if it was, like you said, maybe a bit more raw or maybe leaning a bit more towards the kind of rock side. And I just kind of remember feeling like, this isn't like as upbeat or energetic as I would like. And so they just kind of fell by the wayside. But there's probably value in going back and giving them another listen for sure.
They also had a single off this album that they had a video for it on... Well, I had it on Another Year on the Streets. I don't remember which one it was, but I want to say it was... I want to say the song was Bill of Goods. I'm just trying to look it up here. And the video was... No, it wasn't Bill of Goods. That's too bad. But the video was awesome because it was like following this guy who was kind of going through... Sorry, I'm trying to look it up, but I got to give up. I'm just getting distracted. But it followed like a guy who was going to the show, and he starts kind of like outside the show, and the camera is typically over his shoulder. And if I recall, it's like a one shot through the whole thing, so it just follows him, like going into the concert. Face to Face is obviously playing and stuff. And it was just, if I recall, it was awesome. It was a great video. But let's move on. What was your number 4?
Number 4, we will go with... Sorry, I just added that Redland Kids album on Spotify because I totally remember that band. I don't know if it's any good or not.
It's funny. I mean, I can't say anything to or about them because, I didn't watch them, but I know I wasn't interested in them then, and I don't think I ever got into them. But
I just remember they had a music video in like a diner or something, and like the waiters getting beat up by the jocks or whatever, and
classic,
and they're playing. But let's go with the Getup Kids, Something to Write Home About. So this is, besides their newest one, this is probably the one I've heard the most. I had friends that were really into this one, and anything I had heard before was maybe like a little too emo or slow or whatever for me. But this one has some, it's a bit more upbeat. It's catchy. It's not like too whiny as, especially back then that I found a lot of these kind of bands. This is still an album I like going back to. There's a few standout songs for sure. It's kind of one of those bands that, like I said, was around a lot. Other people were listening to it. So I've heard it a lot, but I don't know it because I never really took it, super personally. But yeah, just one of those ones that I will keep going back to and just stands out for various reasons.
Yeah. I'm just going to jump in because this is actually on my list as well, except it's my number 2. So I'm going to go a little bit out of order here. But this album, it's funny because for me, the Getup Kids are an interesting band. I think I remember hearing about them for the first time because there was like some clip that was floating around on the internet. And this was like back in the days of like mp3.com and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And there was this clip where, from what I can understand, and now this is also a time where this could have been labeled entirely wrong, but I feel like it was labeled as the Getup Kids. They were talking about MXPX. And so and they were basically talking about how like MXPX was like their roadies on tour sort of thing. Like they were just like joking around about them, right? Like I don't know what the context was. I just remember hearing this clip and initially being like, what? Like this doesn't really make any sense, but okay. But then getting into the Getup Kids, this record, it took a while to grow on me. Like I liked it when I first heard it, but it is a record and maybe one of like 2 on my list that has actually like grown on me significantly since I heard it and since I became an adult, kind of getting to appreciate it a little bit more. Like when I was, when these records were coming out and in the Vagrant heyday, because this is the record that is kind of like looked at as the catalyst for sending this label to the heights, like really starting that progression to the heights that it would get to. I was actually a big fan of On a Wire, which was the Getup Kids record that came after this. And based solely, I shouldn't say solely, but really the song that hooked me was the first song, Overdue, on the On a Wire record that I was just like, and it's just like this mellow song. It's really good. But so forever, I always said like that was my favorite Getup Kids record. And part of that was probably just me trying to be like, like quote unquote counterculture in the sense that, you know, like Something to Write Home About was the classic Getup Kids album, and then they made this change going into On a Wire, which lost some people. I still really like On a Wire, but as time has gone on, Something to Write Home About has been that record that's kind of like my appreciation of it has grown more and more. And like they just on Valentine's Day did their live stream where they played this record cover to cover, and I'm just like, and it's funny because I don't know why I was so surprised at how good they played it live when they just put out one of my favorite records of the last couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Like, Problems is like, it's so good. Problems, like now for me on my list of Getup Kids albums is, I think, probably number 2, following only Something to Write Home About, which is interesting because like I've dug this band and quite a bit for a number of years, and so for them to release that, like, fantastic. But yeah, when I was watching it, I was like, oh man, they sound so good. Like, this surprises me. And then I was like, well, yeah, like they literally just released an album that I really like quite a bit. I shouldn't be surprised that they could still do this, right? But
yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, here we are. So what's your next record on your list?
Well, this one I was forced into because the one I picked isn't on the label.
Yeah,
so.
We'll save for a different episode.
And that is Alex is on Fire.
Yes,
as many people like to argue when this band came out about how to pronounce the name. And so every time I see it, I can just... It's like the first thing that pops in my head. I'm just like, oh, this is so annoying that... that's what I think of. But yeah, this is... Yeah, I mean, a Canadian band, you know,
did you say which record it was?
Crisis.
Yes.
So is that their second newest one? Young Cardinals is the newest?
I guess so, yeah, because, I mean, they had I think they had an EP that they released before they broke up, and then they had like a single or 2 songs or whatever that they released since they got back together. But as far as, like full lengths, it would be considered their second newest one.
Okay. So I kind of rediscovered this one a little bit, which was good. I mean, as I put it on, I definitely could pick out, the singles and the ones, either had music videos or ones I'd heard. And but there's always a lot to take from this band. Sometimes for my liking, it's a bit too much at times. Sometimes the guitars are a little bit too noodly, or the vocals, as good as they are sometimes like there's just too many kind of parts, or I don't know. That's just as I was re-listening it through, when I kind of got to the end, it's like, okay, I can for sure remember a few songs, but I'm not really sure. Well, and also with this one, I listened to it on YouTube because my wife was using Spotify or whatever, and so I think the songs were all in order, but at some point it seemed like it was mixed up, or anyways, whatever.
Right.
Really, really great band. I remember the first time seeing them live when they came here, when they had just put out that first album, so there was a lot of buzz about them. And I think it was them and Billy Talent, 2 bands right on the edge of blowing up. And I got to see them a number of years later, and kind of various connections. But great band, cool album. They're not albums that I go to very often, but I do enjoy them when they're on. And again, like I said, it's, one of those bands that it was pretty much impossible to escape for a long time. They were always kind of on or around.
Well, they were even, I don't know about in the States, but they were on the radio here. That's pretty impressive. This is actually my favorite Alexis on Fire album. And I make no, I don't know. It's funny because Alexis on Fire, I really liked that self-titled album. It was a little more, I don't know if spazzy is the right word necessarily, but and then you could tell there was, especially on the song Pulmonary Archery on that first record, where it's like, man, there's a guy in this band who has a really good voice that they're not really using, right? And then Watch Out came out, and it was like, oh, they realized that he has this really good voice because all of a sudden he's on every single song, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, I think on that record, I know I was taken aback, I think, by George the Screamer, his vocals. I feel like they changed a little bit between those first 2 records.
Well, Well, he probably screamed a lot more than he was used to.
Right. Yeah. And then they changed again later on, like Old Crows, Young Cardinals, or whatever that record's called. His vocals changed again. But on Crisis, it's funny. I didn't buy it, and I wasn't really like, I knew it was out, and I was kind of like, okay, whatever. And then my wife, Lindsay, she like just one day was like, oh, surprise, I bought this for you, and it was Alexis on Fire Crisis. And I was like, okay, cool. And so I put it in, and I was immediately like, obviously there were 2 radio singles on this album. I think Boiled Frogs and This Could Be Anywhere in the World, or whatever it's called.
Right.
And so I knew those songs, but as I listened to this record, I was like, dang, there's like a lot of really good, like for me, what I love so much about this record, and you talked about like the different vocalists. Well, they've got 3 vocalists who are all so distinct, but all so good at what they do.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have obviously Dallas Green. I mean, Dallas Green is like, nowadays, it's funny because at the time I would have like, that's what I would have been so hype about in listening to this record was Dallas Green. But now with Dallas Green, obviously I've got some like City and Color stuff on the wall. But even then he like kind of annoys me. Like his voice has gotten to a point now where I'm like, okay, like it's too much sometimes, right?
Too croony.
Maybe, but like back with these records, like I still love it, but like the work between himself, but mainly like George and Wade is where I'm like, oh, it's so good. Cause like Wade almost plays this like in between George and Dallas, right? Like he's, it's really awesome. There's some super standout songs I think on this record, like that I was gladly listening to it earlier today, but, when we were discussing, kind of like which records, because you had said Watch Out, and I was like, that wasn't actually on Vagrant. The first release that they put out on Vagrant was the Switcheroo series with Moneen, which was also like an interesting kind of experiment because, they were covering each other's songs, and I think they each had one new song on there. But I remember being a little bit like disappointed in the sense, you want to talk about a band that gets noodly with their guitars, Moneen is that band. Yes. But I was a little bit disappointed in the sense that Alexis on Fire only kind of really covered older Moneen songs, and then Moneen at the time only really covered newer Alexis on Fire songs. And I was like, I wanted them to mix it up a little bit, but still like one of the greatest, in my mind anyway, splits that I've ever owned and really listened to was that Switcher, which is funny because I don't know if they did any more. Like not those, I don't
think so.
Not Moneen and Alexis on Fire, but the fact that they called it
the
Switcheroo series. And then I'm like, I don't think there were any other ones. Like, I'm curious to know if there was another Switcheroo series that came out because I don't
recall any other ones.
I don't remember hearing about it, but yeah, let's see what happens. I mean, you just get Alexis on Fire and versus Moneen. What happens if I click on Dynalone Records? It's just Alexis on Fire and Moneen. So yeah, like that's what it's curious to me that they call it the Switcheroo series because it sounded like they were gonna, by that name, like they were gonna make this a regular thing.
Yeah, maybe they were going to, and then it just nobody else wanted to do it or something.
Yeah, I bring up the Switcheroo series though because my next record on my list is Moneen. Are we really happy with who we are right now? This record, I don't know what to say about this record. I absolutely love this record and always will absolutely love this record. Moneen is one of my, I would say, like favorite bands from kind of high school years, just because I saw them so many times and they were always so crazy. Like you never knew what to expect when you'd see them live. But I saw them, so many times. And this record for me, like start to finish, is so good. I really like the records that came before it. Red Tree is interesting. It's the one that came after this one. Because it's a lot more polished. That was the one, actually, I talked with Brian McTurnan about it.
That's right.
Because he did that record. And, so like, this was like the last, like, the pinnacle record, I suppose, for me for Moneen. And I think because, like, the Red Tree, and then they had another one, I believe, that came after that. Or maybe it was just an EP. I can't remember. But anyway, where I was, like, sort of had moved on a little bit from being, like, oh, I need all of this Moneen, even though I just saw them a few years ago live. I was super pumped. They played the Calgary Stampede with Dashboard Confessional.
Yeah,
like, if that's awesome. Not the weirdest, like, Calgary Stampede show. I don't know what is, but it was incredible, and they were just as good then as they were like when I remember seeing them in the early 2000s. Like, and I know we've talked about Moneen a few times on the show. You're not a huge fan of the band, and I can understand why. Like, they have times where they'll just like go off and either be like spastic and crazy, or they'll like get stuck in these almost like loops of just like dreamy reverb delay guitars, and that's where I'm just like, when I see them live, I could just stand there for 3 hours watching them play like the same thing, you know, and like everyone's just swaying or whatever. But I don't know, man, like this band, they were just so much fun. Like everything about them, they'd write these kind of like sad, serious songs, and then they're just a bunch of goofs on stage. Like, I loved it, everything about them. But and watching them jump off, you know, speaker stacks and, you know, dogpile on the floor. Like the one time I saw them, they were playing. They have a song called "The Passing of America," which actually Alexis on Fire on the Switcheroo series, that was one that they covered. But it was always their closing song, and you always knew something was going to happen. And so they're playing The Passing of America on this one tour, and in the middle of it, they went into I Believe in a Thing Called Love by The Darkness.
Oh, yeah.
And then, like, in the middle of that, like, all, like, the whole, like, you know, other band that was on tour with them and, like, their whole crew and whatever, just, like, dogpiled on Kenny, the singer, in the middle of the stage. And then, because they would have a guitar tech that would come out and play guitar on that song for them, where then Kenny would just go crazy.
Oh,
singing.
yeah.
And so they, like, all dogpiled on Kenny, and he's, like, singing. And then also just, like, they got off at the same time and, boom, went right back into The Passing of America. And it's just, like, ugh, like, everything about them was always, like, such a good time. And I say that as if they're not around. They're still around. They haven't released any new music in quite some time.
Yeah.
This record, I debated bringing it with me downstairs tonight because it's one of those ones on vinyl where I was like, as soon as it was reissued, or I shouldn't say reissued, as soon as it was on vinyl for the first time, I was snapping it up. Or snatching it up, I should say. But yeah, real quickly, in about 10 seconds, tell us how much you love Moneen.
I got lots of funny stories about people being mad at me because I didn't like them.
Yeah.
It was, you know, this album and band were huge for a lot of the friends around me, so I was kind of subject to listening to it. I mean, like you said, super talented band, awesome live band. Just not for me. I think it was, you know, maybe I'm still far behind developing my music taste or whatever, but, you know, when this came out, you know, my friends were kind of, you know, getting into more like whether it was the emo-ish stuff or whatever. I was still just like punk or metal. I didn't really have any interest in the kind of more whatever you want to call this style. So, I mean, yeah, later on, I was like, okay, you know, I get it a bit more and maybe have a bit more of a tolerance, but yeah,
it's funny. I was just reminded of one time that I saw them. I was in a band and we were playing a show that night in Calgary. And I just I was like, okay, guys, here's the thing. We're going to play early and then I'm going to leave. So are you guys cool to take like the gear home? Because I'm going to go see Moneen. And I just like ditched the rest of my band
that's the way to do it.
To go see Moneen. I think I went with like one other friend who maybe he like picked me up or whatever. So I didn't have to, but yeah, it's like, well, we played a good show. I remember like Steven, our bass player, he borrowed a friend's bass because I think his was in the shop at the time or something like that. But he was like at one point went to do like, this was in the early 2000s. So like the classic like guitar toss, the bass toss. And he the strap locks gave way, and so he just threw it directly into a wall. Like first thing, it was like whoop, bam, just into the wall. But then also in that show at one point, he was, you know, moving, does the classic, like, you know, he brings the neck of the bass forward or whatever and back. But when he did it, he totally smoked some girl standing in the front row, and I was just like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm not dealing with this. But what's next on your list?
I'll go with Hot Rod Circuit. Sorry About Tomorrow. So this is another one that
Hot Rod Circuit. I think. Oh, you can't see it now, can you? Nope.
No.
Here it's at the drive-in and then nothing. But there's Hot Rod Circuit on this poster.
Oh, cool.
Oh, I didn't point out the Getup Kids earlier either.
Oh, yeah, there they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as I see the cover and the album starts, it just takes me back to listening to it with a few friends that were big fans of it. And again, back then I didn't appreciate it that much, but as I was listening through it last week and I listened through it again today, it's a really good album. Like it's really upbeat and it's catchy. It's not, I don't like saying the word whiny or emo. I don't whatever that like how some of the Getup Kids stuff, maybe just slower paced or whatever it is. It's, to me when I was listening, I was like, this is just kind of like a rock record. It's it's super catchy. It's not repetitive or annoying. Like it keeps you engaged and just a really good album overall.
It's very much straight and to the point. Like it's a record that when it's over, you're like, oh, it's over. And then you just put it on again. Not necessarily in the sense where you listen to it, for me anyways, where I listen to it and, as it comes to a close, I'm listening and going, oh man, I already know I want to start this again. A record that kind of does that for me. No, I won't say it because we're going to talk about it. It's going to be on one of my lists upcoming. So, but there is a record that I think of very much when I think of like a closing song that makes me want to put the album on and listen again. Yeah. This doesn't have that, but it's so straight and to the point and just like simple that like there's nothing about it that's wrong. I don't know if that makes sense because that sounds like I'm saying I don't like it and I don't know why I don't like it. I really like this record. And I think when we were texting back and forth, because I don't think I ever brought this one up. And, you had said, I think you'd really like it. I was like, oh, I know this record. Like it would be in my top 10 for sure. Yeah. Just not in my top 5 necessarily. And even saying that, like obviously this top 5, it's missing out on some records that, I also still very much love. Like Vagrant Records was that label, right, for me. So, but yeah, and the thing I love about the cover of this record is it's like very much fits like Vagrant Records for me in like that era. Like I put it there with, No Motive, diagram.
The classic girl on the cover in some position or pose.
Yeah, exactly. And then for whatever reason, I think just because of how it's like kind of chopped up, like reminds me of Dashboard Confessional, and there's just like different stuff going on with this record. I think that is very much Vagrant Records, like of the early 2000s. But it is so it's just really solid songwriting, I think is, what it boils down to.
Yeah, and this one stands up still too, like because I put it on, 100%. Like it doesn't sound super dated or
Yeah. Speaking of really solid songwriting, my next pick, I've gone out of order. I had these in top 5, and then as soon as we went with the Getup Kids,
it's all good.
I was like, okay, I just threw them out. But my next one, solid songwriting, and he is one of, I think, the all-time songwriters for kind of like the emo post-hardcore, especially through the 90s. But Hey Mercedes Loses Control, and so this record is something. I talked about the Getup Kids being a record that's grown on me so much, as an adult, like it continues to grow on me. Say this is the other record where I said Getup Kids was one of 2 in this list. Hey Mercedes Loses Control is an album that when I first heard it, I could not pinpoint what I liked about it. I just knew I liked it. And then as I've listened to it more and more, I've realized that, so Bob Nana is the principal songwriter in Hey Mercedes, and he's also the principal songwriter in a band called Braid, who are, I think they got back together. I don't know if they're still together, but Braid was like an influential post-hardcore kind of emo band in the 90s, and maybe this is blasphemous for me to say, like for people who are, like kind of post-hardcore purists or whatever, but I enjoy Hey Mercedes more than Braid. I like Braid, but Hey Mercedes just showed like, I don't know, I feel like there's a few members in this band. Maybe all the members were actually in Braid as well. It might just be a band minus a guy or two. I'm not 100% sure, but I know I've read it up somewhere, but I don't remember. Anyway, this band, this record in particular, because I think they had another one out before this one on Vagrant Records that I've never really gotten into. But you talk about like a cover kind of catching your eye. That was the case with this record initially for me. I had no idea who Hey Mercedes was, but I saw this cover of, you know, just a dude wearing like a black hoodie or whatever, looking back over his shoulder, and as he's kind of walking towards the camera. And then I saw it was on Vagrant. I was like, okay, I'm going to buy this. Like, everything about this so far I like, so why not, you know, buy it? And as time has gone on, this was one of the records I brought up in our quarantine scene episodes that we did, is like an underrated record. I'm like, you need to go listen to this. And the songwriting, Bob Nana's lyricism specifically, he's got this like laid back vocal style that's just always like, I feel the word that comes to mind when I listen to Bob Nana sing, especially on these records, is comfortable. Like he's also got some solo stuff. I think he released a solo album last year that's really nice. It's like mainly, if not all, acoustic and kind of like nice intricate guitar work. And anyway, I just put him on and he's just one of those comfortable voices for me. But I know you had some thoughts about this record because you were kind of texting me a little bit about it earlier today.
Yeah, another one of those bands that friends listen to, but I probably haven't listened to this in the last 15 years at least. So, yeah, when I was going through both of our lists, I was trying to at least listen to the ones that I didn't really know much about.
Yeah.
And I honestly didn't really expect to like it. You know, I kind of thought, okay, so, you know, it'd be a Vagrant album, so it'll be good, but I don't know if I'll, you know, want to listen to the whole thing. And I listened to it, you know, from start to finish. And I just, every time a song came on, I was just like, man, like, I like this song too. Like, this sounds good too. It's, you know, more upbeat than I expected, or it's catchier, or, you know, there just kept being things that just made me want to keep listening. And so I'm excited to already go back and listen to it again.
I've tried a few times to like give their other album a listen. And I've put it on and I've enjoyed it because it's very much Hey Mercedes still. But yeah, this one I come back to. It's one that I come back to regularly. But it's so good. So what's next on your list?
So my number one is No Motive. Boom. There you go. Diagram for Healing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, yep.
I was going to say, is this your legit number one?
Yeah, so this is I was just going on my list and it wasn't there. I was like, I want to make sure and put this at number one because this is the one out of the 5 that I for sure have listened to the most. You know, since seeing them live in 1999 until now. I mean, we've talked about this album with Roger and gone in depth about it and how much we love it. And I listened through it again today and it just reestablished that, like, man, this album is really good. Like, what I love about it is, you know, there's not necessarily anything like crazy about it. You know, it's a punk rock record, but it's also, it has this really cool kind of underlying kind of moodiness and kind of darkness to it at times. Like, it's not a super kind of poppy, happy punk rock album. It does have some of those moments, but there's also songs like Numb, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know, it's a little bit heavier, but it still has a really good groove and it's catchy. And I don't know, it's just something about this album that just sounds cool and different and special. And it's not one where I would say, oh, it sounds like this album. You know, like comparing it to a different band or something. It's unique to itself.
Yeah, it's funny because when I mentioned putting Face to Face on this list, I'd actually bumped No Motive off simply because I knew we were going to talk about them. And this album, I had Sadness Prevails as my record that I was going to have on the list, mainly because we have rather recently talked about this one with Roger. And, you know, the only one album per band rule, right? But this record, it is one of those records, I've talked about this before, where I put it on and I'm immediately like taken to a specific place. Like, you know, it does that for me. I also think this record is very much like, not only with the cover, we've talked about the artwork, but also very much in like that early 2000s Vagrant sound. Like when I talk about like Hot Rod Circuit, No Motive, Hey Mercedes, you know, some of these bands where it's just like they all have this similar thing to them that, you know, maybe initially I can't pinpoint what it is I love about them, but it just boils down to solid songwriting, right? Like, and it's just they're not messing around, they're not over, like, as much as I love Moneen, you know, you could talk about, well, they have these songs, but it's not just about him crafting a melody and a chord structure. Those songs expand and do other things, right? Like, that kind of take you to other places. Whereas with these bands like No Motive and Hey Mercedes and Hot Rod Circuit, and even to an extent, like, even though they were a little maybe on the punk side, but like Alkaline Trio, their Vagrant releases, just like being really good, straightforward songs. Like, they weren't reliant on having, you know, like riffs that got stuck in your head every song.
Right. Yeah.
You know, they weren't reliant on being like, oh, this is our blazing fast song and this is our soft song. They all had dynamics to them, right? But, and this record is one that's, you know, stood the test of time for me. It holds up just as much today as it did, you know, when I first heard it in 2001 or 2000. Yeah, 2001 probably, I think is when it came out. So yeah, great record.
Yeah.
Fantastic record. And even like, you know, as a band that put out 3 full lengths, like, well, no, they put out more than that, but like 3 full lengths, let's say on Vagrant, because they did have one, I think, before that. But like, they're all so good and they're all so different from each other. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Which is really cool.
So this is, I think, the most straightforward of the 3, maybe. But it's good stuff. My number 1 is interesting because, well, I'll tell you what it is first. It's Dashboard Confessional, Places You Have Come to Fear the Most. And why I say it's interesting is because it's not one that I go to as often, I don't think, now, for obvious reasons. Like, I fell in love with this record because I was, you know, like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid or whatever I would have been at the time, who, you know, had his heart broken or whatever, right? Like, had a girl he liked and couldn't express himself, whatever, you know, all the kind of common cliches that go along with it. But like, this record, and it was also like the first like acoustic album I can remember hearing and being like, oh, this is like so good, you know? Like, I didn't really, you know, come along listening to acoustic music, and obviously like getting into punk and stuff like that, you know, maybe you had the odd album with an acoustic song on it here or there or whatever, but like a full acoustic album was like, it was new to me, right?
Yeah.
And there was just something about it. Now, Dashboard just did a live stream on Valentine's Day as well, actually, which, here's an interesting little tidbit I learned. So when the world shut down with COVID, Dashboard was on tour at that time doing like this Dashboard Confessional 20th anniversary tour thing. And his final show he played, the band that opened was the Getup Kids.
Oh, wow.
Before everything shut down. And then so they planned, you know, obviously after a while, Dashboard planned to do this Valentine's Day show that they were going to do. And they had, you know, done it, produced it, whatever. And then found out that the Getup Kids were also doing a Valentine's Day show. So it became this whole like, it was so much fun to just like be online and see different people being like, oh yeah, like double bill tonight. Like I was tweeting as like, who's going to be my headliner tonight? You know, is it going to be the Getup Kids or is it going to be Dashboard Confessional? Right. Like, so it was really kind of fun in that regard where, you know, most of these like live streams you get, you know, you go and you watch one band. And so, you know, an hour, maybe an hour and a half later, you're done or whatever. Whereas that night it was like, oh, we legit like get an opener and a headliner.
That's awesome.
This is sweet. Yeah. So it was really cool. But, yeah, no, this record will always for sure hold a spot for me, even if I'm not that same, you know, sad emo kid that I was, you know, in the early 2000s, heartbroken every single day or whatever, right? But it also changed like the way I looked at music, in the sense that all of a sudden like an acoustic guitar wasn't like this foreign bad thing. I was like, oh, you can kind of do some neat stuff on it, you know, you can change the tunings and you can play entirely different ways. And yeah, it was so good. And then like the MTV Live or MTV2 or whatever, like the Unplugged album that
sweet.
came out. Yeah. And the thing I loved about that was actually probably the biggest thing on that was Mike Marsh was the guy who played drums for Dashboard.
So good.
Yeah, he was on this record, Places You've Come to Fear the Most. He played on that live record, and I know for sure he did a Mark and Mission, A Brand of Scar. I'm not sure if he was still with the band after that or if that was kind of it, but that dude is still like, I go back and I watch that performance, that MTV Unplugged performance, and like that dude's drumming is so locked in.
Yeah. Love that.
And his vocals Dude, like he.
Oh, I don't remember that part.
Yeah, well, so he sang lead or like co-lead or whatever in a band called Seville, and it's unfortunate that they're not. I think I found one song once up. They used to have a MySpace page, which I think had maybe all or most of their songs, but of course that's gone now. I think if you go on YouTube, you're lucky to find one song. It's so good, like I every now and then I'm just like, oh, I wish I had put that on a CD that I still had somewhere or whatever, because it was like an EP that wasn't like, it's not like it was like you wouldn't find it anywhere here. It was probably on some like small label or whatever. I'm just looking here to see what they were signed to. Seville was a rock group formed in 2001 by Mike Marsh and Dan Bonebreak of Vacant Andes and formerly Dashboard. They disbanded in 2003. I don't even think they were on a label. There's no label listed here. But they were, man, I wonder if I can find them and just send them to you. Because if you're listening and if you haven't heard Seville, you should go check it out, especially if you're a fan of that like early 2000s kind of like emo sort of sound. There's one song I think on YouTube called Reformer. I think
Reformer.
Yeah. Oh, what is this? What? Are they still? No, this must be a different Seville. Now I'm going to look into this because there's something from a year ago where they did songs from a room, like a live session. We Are the People, Empire of the Sun cover. I don't know if that's the same Seville or not, but because then there's what? Yeah, no, I don't think so. Anyway, going right off topic here. It is if you can find that. I think the album was called Waiting in Seville. Was like the EP or whatever. So if any of you have it out there, please let me know, because I would like a copy. It's so good. It's so good. Now you're going to look it up. You got to find it, Aaron. You got to find it.
How is that spelled?
Seville.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which is funny because in the scene, like the Calgary punk scene, there was a band called DeVille.
Oh yeah, I remember them. That's what first came to mind.
DEVILE, yeah. But yeah, no. Dashboard Confessional, Places You've Come to Fear the Most is kind of just one of those records that's sort of stuck with me. I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's a good one. I listened to that one today too, and thoroughly enjoyed singing along and harmonizing and
and crying a little.
Well, I don't know about that, but
admit it.
I don't. I don't remember if I liked this when it first came out or not. Maybe just even knowing like he was kind of from our scene, so to speak.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a bit more acceptable or something. But
right.
Again, I mean, it was around a ton and it was being played at various places or in the tour van. But I definitely enjoy this one a lot too.
Man, there's a crazy story. I think I sent you like a picture from a book that I was reading, and it was like telling a story of, it was one of his first tours, I believe, as Dashboard Confessional, and he was on tour with H2O and Face to Face, and basically like he would go out there every night, open the show, and people would be booing and throwing change at him and stuff like that, right? And then like Toby Morse would come out wearing like a Dashboard Confessional t-shirt every night, and like Trevor Keith was just super supportive, and as kind of things go on, they were throwing change at him, and Toby, did I say Toby Keith? I did just there. I don't know if I said that earlier.
You can make them into one person for the sake of this story.
Yeah, well, and Toby Keith is a country singer too, but Trevor Keith would like, he basically, I think it was something along the lines of, like, pick up that change, man. Like, they're throwing money at you. Like, take that money and run,
Yeah.
And he would just go out there every night and just get up in front of this, punk rock crowd that wasn't expecting this, sad boy kind of thing to get up there with his acoustic guitar. And he said, I feel like by the end of every night, he kind of won the crowd over, sort of thing. Obviously not necessarily every person in that room, but it changes from people being like, boo, get off the stage, to buying merch.
Yeah.
So
man, that's a tour I would love to see now.
Oh, 100%. But anyways, I think that will wrap us up, Yeah.
Do you want me to do a rap to conclude?
No, I don't want you to do a rap. Just making sure you didn't have anything else you wanted to add.
Not this time that I can think of.
All right, cool. Well, make sure you go follow us at Growing Punk Pod on social media, and growingpunkpod.com is our website. Tell your friends about the show, rate it, review it wherever you listen to it. Help it spread a little bit. Help it grow, especially if you got any friends who are fans of Vagrant Records. That will do it, though. So bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.